with that measure of disapproval that he habitually bestowed upon strange men. "You're later than I thought you'd be," he said. "I have a horse half bought for Mrs. Yates. It's that old mare of Bobby Bennett's. She makes a little noise, but she's a good mare, and you couldn't throw her down if you tried. Bobby wants £30 for her, but I think you might get her for less. She's in the hotel stables, and you can see her when you go in to lunch." We moved on towards the rushy bank of the river, and Philippa and Sally Knox seated themselves on a low rock, looking in their white frocks as incongruous in that dingy preoccupied assemblage as the dreamy meadow sweet and purple spires of loosestrife that thronged the river banks. Bernard Shute had been lost in the shifting maze of men and horses, who were, for the most part, galloping with the blind fury of charging bulls; but presently, among a party who seemed to be riding the finish of a race, we descried our friend, and a second or two later he hauled a brown mare to a standstill in front of us. "The fellow's asking £45 for her," he said to Miss Sally. "She's a nail at a gallop. I don't think it's too much." "Her grandsire was the mountain hare," said the owner of the mare, hurrying up to continue her family history, "and he was the grandest horse in all the four baronies. He was 42 years of age when he died, and they waked him the same as you'd wake a Christian. They had whisky and porter and bread and a piper in it." "Thim mountain hare colts is no great things," interrupted Mr. Shute's groom contemptuously. "I seen a colt once that was one of his stock, and if there was 40 men and their wives, and they after him with sticks, he wouldn't leap a sod of turf." "Leap, is it?" ejaculated the owner in a voice shrill with outrage. "You may lead that mare out through the country. There isn't a fence in it that she wouldn't go up to it, as independent as if she was going to her bed. And your honour's ladyship knows that damn well, Miss Knox." "You want too much money for her, McCarthy," returned Miss Sally, with her little air of preternatural wisdom. "God pardon you, Miss Knox. Sure, a lady like you knows well that £45 is no money for that mare. £45!" He laughed. "It'd be as good for me to make her a present to the gentlemen all out, as take 3 farthings less for her. She's too grand entirely for a poor farmer like me, and if it wasn't for the long weak family I have, I wouldn't part with her under twice the money." "3 fine lumps of daughters in America paying his rent for him," commented Flurry in the background. "That's the long weak family." Bernard dismounted and slapped the mare's ribs approvingly. "I haven't had such a gallop since I was at Rio," he said. "What do you think of her, Miss Knox?" Then, without waiting for an answer, "I like her. I think I may as well give him the 45 and have done with it." At these ingenuous words I saw a spasm of anguish cross the countenance of McCarthy, easily interpreted as the first pang of a lifelong regret that he had not asked twice the money. Flurry Knox put up an eyebrow and winked at me. Mr. Shute's groom turned away for very shame. Sally Knox laughed with the deplorable levity of 19. Thus, with a brevity absolutely scandalous in the eyes of all beholders, the bargain was concluded. Flurry strolled up to Philippa, observing an elaborate remoteness from Miss Sally and from Mr. Shute. "I believe I'm selling a horse here myself to-day," he said. "Would you like to have a look at him, Mrs. Yates?" "Oh, are you selling, Knox?" struck in Bernard, to whose brain the glory of buying a horse had obviously mounted like new wine. "I want another, and I know yours are the right sort." "Well, as you seem so fond of galloping," said Flurry sardonically, "this one might suit you." "You don't mean the Moonlighter?" said Miss Knox, looking fixedly at him. "Supposing I did, have you anything to say against him?" replied Flurry. Decidedly he was in a very bad temper. Miss Sally shrugged her shoulders and gave a little shred of a laugh, but said no more. In a comparatively secluded corner of the field we came upon Moonlighter, sidling and fussing with flickering ears, his tail tightly tucked in, and his strong back humped in a manner that boded little good. Even to my untutored eye he appeared to be an uncommonly good-looking animal, a well-bred grey, with shoulders that raked back as far as the eye could wish, the true Irish jumping hindquarters, and a showy head and neck. It was obvious that nothing except Michael Hallahane's adroit chucks at his bridle kept him from displaying his jumping powers free of charge. Bernard stared at him in silence, not the pregnant and intimidating silence of the connoisseur,
but the tongue-tied muteness of helpless ignorance. His eye for horses had most probably been formed on circus posters and the advertisements of a well-known embrocation, and Moonlighter approximated in colour and conduct to these models. "I can see he's a ripping fine horse," he said at length. "I think I should like to try him." Miss Knox changed countenance perceptibly, and gave a perturbed glance at Flurry. Flurry remained impenetrably unamiable. "I don't pretend to be a judge of horses," went on Mr. Shute. "I dare say I needn't tell you that," with a very engaging smile at Miss Sally. "But I like this one awfully." As even Philippa said afterwards, she would not have given herself away like that over buying a reel of cotton. "Are you quite sure he's really the sort of horse you want?" said Miss Knox, with rather more colour in her face than usual. "He's only 4 years old, and he's hardly a finished hunter." The object of her philanthropy looked rather puzzled. "What? Can't he jump?" he said. "Is he jump?" exclaimed Michael Hallahan, unable any longer to contain himself. "Is it the horse that jumped 5 foot of a clothesline in Heffernan's yard, and not one on his back but himself, and didn't leave so much as a track of his hoof on the quilt that was hanging on it?" "That's about good enough," said Mr. Shute, with his large friendly laugh. "What's your price, Knox? I must have the horse that jumped the quilt. I'd like to try him, if you don't mind. There are some jolly looking banks over there." "My price is 100 sovereigns," said Flurry. "You can try him if you like." "Oh, don't!" cried Sally impulsively, but Bernard's foot was already in the stirrup. "I call it disgraceful," I heard her say in a low voice to her kinsman. "You know he can't ride." The kinsman permitted himself a malign smile. "That's his look out," he said. Perhaps the unexpected docility with which Moonlighter allowed himself to be manoeuvred through the crowd was due to Bernard's 13 stone. At all events, his progress through a gate into the next field was unexceptionable. Bernard, however, had no idea of encouraging this tranquillity. He had come out to gallop, and without further ceremony he drove his heels into Moonlighter's sides, and took the consequences in the shape of a very fine and able buck. How he remained within even visiting distance of the saddle it is impossible to explain. Perhaps his early experience in the rigging stood him in good stead in the matter of hanging on by his hands. But, however preserved, he did remain, and went away down the field at what he himself subsequently described as the rate of knots. Flurry flung away his cigarette and ran to a point of better observation. We all ran, including Michael Hallahan and various onlookers, and were in time to see Mr. Shute charging the least advantageous spot in a hollow-faced fuzzy bank. Nothing but the grey horse's extreme activity got the pair safely over. He jumped it on a slant, changed feet in the heart of a furze bush, and was lost to view. In what relative positions Bernard and his steed alighted was to us a matter of conjecture. When we caught sight of them again, Moonlighter was running away, with his rider still on his back, while the slope of the ground lent wings to his flight. "That young gentleman will be apt to be killed," said Michael Hallahan, with composure, not to say enjoyment. "He'll be into the long bog with him pretty soon," said Flurry, his keen eye tracking the fugitive. "Oh, I thought he was off that time!" exclaimed Miss Sally, with a gasp in which consternation and amusement were blended. "There, he is into the bog!" It did not take us long to arrive at the scene of disaster, to which, as to a dog fight, other foot runners were already hurrying; and on our arrival we found things looking remarkably unpleasant for Mr. Shute and Moonlighter. The latter was sunk to his withers in the sheet of black slime into which he had stampeded. The former, submerged to the waist 3 yards farther away in the bog, was trying to drag himself towards firm ground by the aid of tussocks of wiry grass. "Hit him!" shouted Flurry. "Hit him! He'll sink if he stops there." Mr. Shute turned on his adviser a face streaming with black mud, out of which his brown eyes and white teeth gleamed with undaunted cheerfulness. "All jolly fine," he called back. "If I let go this grass, I'll sink too." A shout of laughter from the male portion of the spectators sympathetically greeted this announcement, and a dozen equally futile methods of escape were suggested. Among those who had joined us was, fortunately, one of the many boys who pervaded the fair selling halters, and by means of 7